feedback that people want to contribute scripts, and I think contributing Pixel scripts, which are the Pixie language scripts, is like the easiest way to get involved with the community, right? In the long run, the way we think about Pixie is that we have this like broad platform that enables a bunch of different use cases. We're primarily been focusing on helping application developers do code level debugging, but you can extend Pixie functionality by adding in more custom scripts. And basically, based on the feedback that people want to contribute scripts, we actually open source all of the existing scripts you typically see under the PX namespace. So if you go to our GitHub under Pixie, and we take a look at Pixel scripts, and you go to PX, you'll basically see that every single PX script you see has been open sourced. They're all under the Apache 2 license, so anyone can contribute and modify it. We also added a section on this page and also the previous page on how to contribute to Pixie scripts. And the other area is a documentation. So we actually finally documented the Pixie language so that everyone can understand how it works. But before I go through all those steps, let me just quickly walk through the actual demo of writing a new script. So typically when you're writing a new script, you create a bunch of files, which we'll talk through. Step number 2 is you need to submit a PR. We also request that before you create a new Pixie script, you file an issue and then discuss what you want to do with the script. Since these are actually community scripts, they're pretty curated. We want to make sure that it's only like a small set of scripts that's like broadly useful. Eventually, we'll probably start adding like tags and other things to allow selection of like different script buckets. And then once they are submitted and approved and then merged into our repo, within a few minutes, it should actually be available to every broad Pixie cluster. So before I go into any more details, I'll pause here for a second and see if there are any questions.
So if I want to try it out on my local laptop or wherever,
yes, that's a great
local
question.
Cluster, what do I do?
Yes, that's a great question, and I will show you how that works. Okay, so I'll show you that in the process of actually just doing a Pixie script.
Mihai, did Zain talk to you before the call? No. Okay. Just checking.
Yeah, no knows Mihai is actually part of the script. Okay, so earlier today, I added this folder called HTTP post requests. So again, I'm in the Pixie repo under the Pixel scripts directory and under the PX namespace, which is where all the community scripts are located. So let me go into the HTTP post request. Over here, we see like 2 files. There's the actual Pixel script. Again, it can be called anything. It doesn't really matter. And then there's this file called the manifest. So I'll actually start with the manifest because that's simple. So the manifest basically has like metadata about the script. So over here, it just says, hey, I'm going to show sample HTTP data. That looks like a bad message. So let me say it shows sample HTTP data with post sample HTTP post data. How about that? Okay. HTTP records in a cluster that have method post. Cool. So we basically have the high-level description of what this script does. So the next thing is the Pixel script. For some reason, it didn't syntax highlight. And we'll talk about this in more detail, but just for overview, I think everyone's seen some form of a Pixel script before. So Pixel is basically a Python dialect. I mean, it is 100% compatible with Python. The only difference is that it's pretty heavily based on like a Python library called pandas. So under the hood, while it looks like Python, it's actually like a data flow language. So for people who are familiar or not familiar with data flow languages, it's basically a way to declare what operations are done, but not necessarily how to carry out those operations. and everything is set up as some like data flow. Since we deal with lots and lots of data, we basically are building data pipelines inside of Pixie. So just a quick walkthrough. There is a data frame, which is basically our fundamental unit, which is like a table that we can look at. We pull a bunch of fields out from the table. You can apply filters. So over here, it says take this data frame and then filter out only values that do post requests. So for reference, this is basically the same script as the one that's in HTTP data, but we added in this method to basically check and see if it's a post request. And then it does a little bit of stuff to normalize the latencies. So for example, it takes the latency in nanoseconds and converts it to milliseconds. And since everything is like a data operation, if you do this for a single value, it actually applies it to the entire column. Nothing is actually done in PxL until you call a function that does a side effect. So for example, when you do display, it'll actually have a side effect of showing you what the data is, and that'll get it to compute all the results. Cool.
Hey Zain, I'm just going to ask you a question in between. On line 33, you dropped UPID and you picked it up. Like, can you just like explain why you pick it up, drop it, and didn't use it?
Oh, yes. So a couple of things. One is in general, it is actually safe to just select all the columns. Since PxL is a column-based system internally, and we do everything, all data inside of PxL is immutable. So even if you select everything, it actually has very little cost to us because we can optimize it away. So why do we do this with UPID? Okay, so this is a good time to explain what UPIDs are. For people who are not familiar with UPIDs, it is what we call like our universal process ID. So regular process IDs in Linux are not unique in either space or time, right? So on the same machine, they can repeat, and then obviously they can repeat across machines. So what we do in Pixie is that every process we assign it like a universal ID, which sounds very fancy, but it's really the identifier is like, here's the host it's running on, here's the start time of the process, and here's the process ID. So the reason we pulled in UPID is a lot of things inside of Pixie are based on UPID. So for example, line 32, it actually says pull service out of context. And this thing over here, so we have a lot of contextual information for every record, and almost all the contextual information is tied to the UPID.
Got it. Okay.
So that was a long-winded answer, but basically we do a lot of stuff based on the UPID, and we probably should just implicitly pull it in always, but it's been manually pulled in this case.
Got it. Okay.
Any other questions so far?
The only question here is a kind of high level, maybe 2 sentences on what Pandas is.
Oh, yes. So Pandas is a Python data processing library. It is a super popular library that's used by a bunch of people in the machine learning and data science community, and it allows you to work with data pretty efficiently.
Cool. Again, folks, if you have more questions, use Slack or the chat. We'll try to address them now and definitely right after as well. Go for it, Zain.
Cool. Okay. So once we have figured out what our scripts are, I can actually quickly show the question that Mihai had, which is like, how do I actually test this out locally, right? Because like obviously, if you submit it, you don't want to just sit there and like copy paste scripts all day, right? It's gonna be kind of annoying to do into the UI. So what you can actually do is if you're in the PxL scripts directory, actually let me make sure I pulled in the, I did. Okay, cool. Okay, so if you're in the PxL scripts directory, you can type in make dev. And when you run make dev, it actually starts up with this little dev server. And then it says like, open up the Chrome console and copy and paste this line in. So if you're on Pixie, let me just go here. We'll switch over to our prod cluster.
While you do that, may I write after, hopefully by the weekend, we'll add a tutorial as well. So we'll document all the steps.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
this looks straightforward. Like it's not a big deal.
Yeah. So if you do the local storage set item, so actually before I do that, you'll see over here that the HTTP post thing doesn't exist. That script doesn't exist right now. So I'll refresh it because we don't fetch that bundle aggressively. And then once this loads, we should have the HTTP post request script that we just added. And then we see a list of all the post requests, and you can see they're all posts. So that's how the dev server works. When you kill the dev server, it gives you this command to run again. I will say that if you forget to run this, it won't be able to find any scripts. So you'll find out.
Yeah,
Cool.
just use private browsing and then you're fine.
Or just do private browsing, yeah. Cool, so with that in mind, I will just show a quick overview of how to do this. So you can just add the repo or the directory. You can check out a branch. I can say HTTP post request. Add a script to capture only HTTP post requests. And then you can push this to I think if you are in the community, you'll have to create a typical like GitHub fork of the repo and then do the pull request. We'll add some instructions for that as well. So once that's done, you can basically just create a pull request. I think we asked that there's an issue for it. And I'm gonna just add Sean and Philip as reviewers. So because these scripts are like available to all the community repos, there's a very small set of reviewers that can actually approve the request. But once you submit the script, we'll actually run through all the CI checks for it and then validate that the script is good. So this should complete in a few seconds.
I have a question. I saw there's another file called viz.json. What does that do?
Oh yeah, so that's a good question. So wiz.json, so in this case, if you notice, there's no visualization, so we just dumped it out as a table. Wiz.json specifies like a way to build like all these like fancy visualizations. So we will add a lot more information about how to actually build wiz.json stuff. But with wiz.json, you can build all sorts of Wiz visualizations.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I would probably like that to be YAML, but I guess you can't do that.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, we could do whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's in neither JSON or YAML right now. No, my PR failed. Why did my PR fail? Oh, looks like there's a lint error. This is not a planned part of the demo. Line 27. Sorry about that.
Do you want to just run the lint locally real quick?
Yeah, I should have done that.
So in the meanwhile, I'm assuming that like the kind of script that Michelle showed before, where you can take in optional arguments, would be a better use case for this, right? So you would pass the method and rewrite just one script where you can filter. Is that right? Or am I thinking about this the right way?
That is correct. You can pass in optional arguments and do that for this use case. I just did not want to make this too complicated.
Right. So, for example, like Rupa, like if you had to write a script which takes HTTP requests, looks at error requests, and filter by specific pod, like something like Ashwin at some point asked, you can create that script, expose those arguments, and then commit to the repo, and then everybody else in your team can basically use that. If it's in the community repo, everybody in the world can use it. But yeah. All right.
So while this is, sorry, go ahead, Sean.
No, I was just like, while this goes ahead, Travis, that it's work. Like, any other questions, folks?
Okay, so while this is running, the other thing I was going to show is we wrote an overview of the Pixel language. So if you go to our docs page, sorry, the Zoom thing keeps getting in the middle of my presenting. Okay, if you go to the docs page, there is a Pixel language Pixel section. So over here, you can actually get, there's a high level overview of how the language works and what are all the data types. And we also have pretty comprehensive support for semantic types, so we can understand like Kubernetes entities and do special operations on them. And you can get into the details of, all the functions that we support. So PxL has a lot of different functions. So you can take a look at this. For example, we have a bunch of functions that operate on like pods. So like you can take a pod and convert it to like a namespace. Anyway, so there's a long list of functions you can try out. We'll probably be categorizing these a little bit more to make it easier to find. But at this point, everything that we have is documented. And as we add more stuff, the documentation will automatically get updated to reflect that. Cool. So at this point, I'll jump back to the PR. The PR has been approved and all the checks have passed. We do ask that everyone sign a CLA. So if you do submit a code for the first time, it'll actually ask you to sign a CLA, and that's part of the workflow. I'll just merge it myself. Normally, one of us would merge the script. So once it's merged, it has to go through another build process because it's been checked into our main branch. And as soon as that happens, just for reference, this HTTP post data is still not here. But if you give it another like 30 seconds, it will finish building the main branch. And after it does that, it'll actually automatically pop up in the UI. So while that runs, I'm happy to talk about other stuff or go into more details about the language. Let me know if there are any questions.
Let me jump in a little bit. So folks, so we kind of hit the 11 o'clock, which is amazing. Awesome work. If you have questions, stick around. Like a lot of people dropped off. And if you need to drop off, feel free to drop off. We'll stick around for like 15 to 30 minutes right after. Just to kind of recap on the scripts piece, folks are on like different kind of adoption journeys. So a lot of people are just starting up with Pixie. So we have all of these kind of PxL community scripts which come out of the box. The idea is for you to get comfortable with that. And then as you can advance, like if you want to write your own scripts, kind of contribute to it. So you don't have to start writing scripts on day 0. So it's kind of an evolution as you use Pixie more. The other thing is as we GA, we do plan to support team-specific scripts. So folks like kind of Todd, Ashwin, like Rupak, like as you're building out kind of Pixie within your team. So there are community scripts like the one that Zain mentioned, which is for all people on Pixie, and then there would be team-specific scripts. So here's a standard way that your team members can kind of debug incidents. So just want to kind of bring that up. So all right, so that was me, Zain. Back to you. Yep. We'll stick around. So feel free to ask any questions. I have a question for you, Zain, again from Saurabh.
Yeah, give me 10 seconds. So I was just going to quickly show that the build process completed. So now that we are back on the build process, we can actually see the script already got updated and it's available over here. So the whole loop's basically been, oh, I'm on the wrong cluster, sorry. The whole loop's basically been closed. So you can go from like a submission to, the script being released to the community like pretty quickly as long as it's been approved and passed all tests. All right, Ishan, open for the question now.
Same question. Is PxL built on pandas?
PxL is not built on top of pandas, but it is very heavily inspired by pandas. So in the sense that actually almost everything in PxL is valid pandas code, but we actually have a custom execution system because PxL runs on like a fully distributed environment, which pandas doesn't support.
Would you consider supporting something like SQL instead of PxL?
We don't have plans to add SQL to it, but we can. Like PxL is just like a facade language, right? It doesn't actually. If you go like, we'll actually some point talk about the guts of how all this stuff works. But PxL basically compiles into this protobuf that says like, here's a data flow computation. So as long as someone tells us what the data flow is, we'll execute it.
Right. And I saw you're planning to open source the eBPF exporters. Are you comfortable doing that anytime soon? I'd like to look at those.
Yeah, so the plan is to try to get those out. So some of the eBPF code will be released because part of it has to be released because of licensing issues. So we're going to be working on doing that.
Pankaj asks, Pankaj helps the ThoughtSpot team. Are you using Dusk or parallel computing?
We are not.
We built the backend in-house.
We are using Arrow though. So the entire system is actually built on Arrow, which is like a data frame library in, well, I guess in Python and C++ and Rust and a bunch of other languages now.
Cool, Pankaj, hopefully that clarified your question. As Zain mentioned, like we do plan to kind of add documentation and kind of write about and publish an engineering blog on how the engine works. He says 2 exclamation marks, great, 2 exclamation marks. So
yeah,
Pankaj is excited. I did have a question for if I guess Rupak dropped out, maybe like I can put Ashwin on the spot. In terms of like writing scripts, like what other resources would be helpful? So obviously we started with docs, but we have a lot more to do. Would kind of more tutorials be helpful, Ashwin, Mihai, like as you think about this stuff?
Maybe one question here. How does pagination actually work? Like, let's say you get a huge volume of data. I assume the UI is not going to try to display all of it, or is it?
No, the UI won't display all of it. And actually right now you can see that it's only showing 27 of the 100 records down here. And I recently, I think this message is a little confusing because it'll always be like 27. But it actually just virtually scrolls. So it's an infinite scroll and we basically select the data.
Oh, it actually is updating if you scroll.
Well, I know, but it's either 27 or 28 based on which glitch you're on. Because it's actually showing you like records like 0 to 27, and then when you scroll down, it's like 3 to 30 or whatever.
So is
but
this
it's
like
a little glitchy.
Is this like since the PxL script was installed, or how does it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So right now we ran the script in like batch mode, so all the data got executed and returned once. So part of what's coming next, and we'll talk about that in a second, is like full like streaming. And once it's streamed, we'll basically show you like a window of data so that we don't overwhelm the UI.
Okay, that makes sense.
Ashwin, were you